All right, we're all set.
Thank you, Maggie. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this special call meeting. We were asked if we would meet to consider a couple items. So I will call the meeting to order and ask for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. So the first item is the approval. It's listed as approval of projects $250,000. The only item that we're being asked to approve today is the last item. It's a security item that the board wanted staff to go ahead and try to get secured out of funds from this year's budget. So I'll turn it over to Shauna and Michael, and they will explain the particulars.
Thank you, Ms. Green. So the last item on the list, item 7, is funded out of general fund, funded out of the general operating fund. Is for A3 Communications. They won the bid for the weapons detectors that are going to be installed in schools. I'll let Michael talk more in detail about that. But just to discuss a bit of the solicitation process, we did a solicitation. There were 2 bids received, and A3 Communications was the firm selected through the procurement process. So Michael, I'll defer to you to talk a little bit more about what this procurement item actually is.
Thank you, Ms. Williams and Ms. Green. Good afternoon, everyone. So we've been engaged in discussions with our Board of Trustees about potential security enhancements that could be considered for our schools moving forward. And these discussions have been happening in earnest, particularly since Uvalde, the shooting in Texas last school year. One of the potential enhancements was the purchase of weapons detector devices for all of our high schools. And so this is, as Ms. Green mentioned, this came before the board on Monday's committee of the whole, and they approved the request to allocate funding toward this purchase. And so we're coming before you today to approve the actual issuance of the contract of the winner of the solicitation.
And Michael, this would include, does this cover all of the schools or just some of them?
This would cover all of the high schools and our high school programs.
Are there any? Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, ma'am. I was going to also add the number of devices per school was determined based on the geography of the school and how many entrances they have. So we would want to get adequate coverage at all the entrance doors and provide them with adequate number of detectors to do that.
And so once you have secured, gone through the final process, procurement process, how long will it take for installation?
So there's approximately an 8-week lead time once the order is submitted. And at that point, or before that point, we would start working with the high schools to determine the best way to deploy these.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for Michael?
So Michael, who utilizes these? Is this existing security staff, or is this going to be school-based non-security staff?
So initially, we're going to have to work with our schools to try to determine that. Our initial goal is to try to do a pilot, if you will, within the schools to validate some staffing models that we've created. And so if you remember in the board discussions, there was a recurring cost associated with a full deployment of these. Doing kind of a soft rollout will help us validate some of those numbers to see if it needs to be that high or can we do it potentially with less, but ultimately determined based on a full rollout, what would a staffing model look like? And then are there any sort of other intermediate options that may be available to lessen the staffing requirement for sustainability's sake?
So I think my question is, will this affect contract, like teachers, they have assumed contracts. If we're at some point unable to fund the staffing for this fully, is this staff that can be reduced and expanded, or are they going to be protected employees like other contract employees within CCSD?
So the full cost model that we presented originally involved a combination of using contract employees, contract security employees, in addition to providing existing employees with a stipend or additional pay for overtime that may be incurred based on that. Again, that's kind of the I don't say worst case scenario, but that's kind of a full rollout scenario. And we'll just try to spend the next few months over this school year to determine what our long-term needs may be, and then try to integrate any requests in FY24 budget request.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, sorry to be slow in this, but I know I think Velma raised the point last time. I just want to make sure I follow what the board's expectation is in terms of our approval of this, because it sounds like the board has already approved this. So when I'm asking, when we're being asked to approve this, are we being asked to approve, was the process proper? Or are we being asked to approve, was this in the budget? Or are we being asked to approve, is this a good decision, which gets into, is it appropriate? Is it fair pricing? Is there a top priority from a spending? Like, I'm just trying to understand what the board expects from us so that we're doing what the board wants us to do in this.
No apology needed, because I had this question myself. And I think, Shauna, I'm going to ask you to answer this, but it didn't happen through normal channels, because it would have, I guess, come to us first. And I'm not sure. Well, let me ask Shauna to answer that.
So I saw Mr. Kennedy come off mute, so I wanted to give him the opportunity to respond first, and then I can jump in.
I see this somewhat of a hybrid. So I think ultimately what we want to get to is that for anything like this, anything over $250,000 goes to the school board for their approval, that it actually comes in through the Audit and Finance Committee for a complete review and validation, both in terms of the process and whether it makes sense for an acquisition for the district. In this instance, though, because of a couple of unique situations. One, the board this is the last board meeting on Monday. And so because of the heightened sense of the need for safety and security in our schools, this board wanted to take action so that we can get those things in place. So what they approved on Monday was the concept of putting in these weapons detectors. So yes, they approved that, and they approved a funding source for it. And so when it's coming back to the Audit and Finance Committee for this particular procurement, is to validate the process that we went through with the bid process, and that was a valid process. And then in the future, as we work through this, we will bring that hybrid together and have a complete package coming into the Audit and Finance Committee, and then subsequently on to the school board.
Thanks, very helpful, Don. So what is the revenue source, just out of curiosity? So how are we funding this? We're not taking fund balance, or are we?
We are.
Okay.
We are taking, we set aside, the committee of the whole, the request was to set aside $1 million out of fund balance. Since it's current year funding and the budget has already been developed, that would be the only fund source for us to use at this time. It doesn't qualify for ESSER funding. It also, we looked at doing a bond issuance for the entire package that Mr. Reinbach had submitted, which was $50 million, in addition to another $100 million that was needed by the capital division. And when we looked at our cash flows, it just didn't make sense to go to market for that much money at this particular time with the pending recession, as well as the ESSER funding cliff. And so that only left fund balance as a viable resource to fund this initiative.
But I thought we were going to reduce the 10 million that we had the money that we were gonna set aside to support ESSER initiatives, the 10 million that we were not gonna put in the fund balance, we were gonna put aside. I thought this was gonna come out of that 10 million.
It does. It's all a part of fund balance, Ms. Green. So it's just
okay,
where it's how it's designated in the fund balance, whether it's committed or uncommitted. So essentially, we initially, the board approved to commit $10 million to fund balance for ESSER stabilization. And then the board, again, took action to reduce that by $1 million to basically fund the security detectors.
But I would also add that when the $10 million was estimated a few months ago, we said, Sean and her team said it was an estimate. And when the auditors reported to the Audit and Finance Committee last week, I think it was, and they'll report to the board on Monday, that $10 million was actually higher. And I think it was closer to 13 million. So although we're taking $1 million out of fund balance, we're actually putting in more than the $10 million that was projected earlier.
So was this an RFP or a straight bid where the lowest bid vendor won the award?
It went out for bid through the RFP process.
And I guess, Shauna, y'all didn't have an opportunity to expand on, the discussion we had that Velma brought up at the last meeting about a little bit more information coming in on each of these. I assume y'all just didn't have time to do that for this particular item, because that was one of the reasons I'd asked Michael if he would be here to explain. But I did want to ask Velma if she had any particular questions, because I didn't see anything additional about the actual process in the documents.
So thank you for your question, Ms. Green. We did add detail to the justification or solicitation column, where we identified that 2 total bids were received and we had selected this one firm. What we plan on going through in the future is to add more robust details to these columns. We didn't want to modify the entirety of the whole document since the first 6 items were already approved. As is, we just modified that last line item to add a little more information. But going forward, we plan to provide more detail, more narrative format to accompany the figures that you all see.
What were the weighting factors that you evaluated the proposals against?
Wayne, Mr. Welch, are you on the call?
Yes, I'm on the call here. I need to go back and clarify. This was not an RFP. This was an IFP. It was an invitation for a bid, so it was the lowest price.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for that.
Are there any other questions? If not, I will ask for a motion.
Move to approve.
It. Yes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Okay. And the second item has to do with some mid-year budget amendments. So Shauna, would you like to explain that?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. Green. So when we developed the FY23 budget, we added a clause to the narrative and discussed with the board that there would be potentially a mid-year budget amendment once we assessed additional needs from the operations. There were a few outliers that came in to play in that discussion. One is the actual facilities maintenance plant operation increase for new custodial contracts. It goes into effect January 2023. And the other items are for athletics. They'll use an additional $500,000 to fund 7 athletic directors. In addition to coaching stipends will increase by 10%. And so those 3 items, the net of those 3 items are about $1.3 million increase in the FY23 budget. This will come from fund balance to fund these initiatives. And we're asking for the committee to review and approve this budget amendment.
And this says on information only, but it does need the approval of the
Yes, ma'am.
Right? Yeah. Okay, I thought so. I'm okay to to approve this, but I am a little bit concerned, and I know we have a little extra money, and you won't have to listen at me talk about fund balance after the day, but you know that does concern me a little bit. That we don't start just, you know, a little here and a little there and a little here. I know you guys are watching it, and so it's not a matter of, I don't think you are, but I have to go on the record by saying that. So I've said it.
So the seven athletic directors are these new positions, or are the positions vacant now?
You want me to take that, Ms. Williams? Thank you. Ms. Velma, good question. So these are not new positions. 7 of our athletic directors out of 9 are part-time teachers, part-time athletic directors. So these 7 individuals are at work now. What happens is that their athletic duties are extremely limited because they're teaching classes. And so what happens is that the school takes one of their teaching points that they should have a full-time teacher and saying, okay, you're going to be an athletic director, but you're still going to teach 2 classes because I'm paying for it with my school money. This levels the playing field in all of our schools and allows the schools to take that point back into the teachers, into education. This lines us up with all other counties around us. Berkeley, Dorchester, Horry, Georgetown, they all have full-time athletic directors in their high school. So it allows our athletic directors to focus on athletics and allows a full-time teacher where those are being used right now.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So, may I ask a question, Joyce?
Sure, absolutely.
Does this put a full-time, non-teaching athletic director in every high school in CCSD?
It has been full-time for as long as I can remember at the 2 largest high schools. And then this year we funded Academic Magnet just after the school year started because of the state provision of having School of the Arts being allowed to play at that campus, which really added to the complexity of Academic Magnet. So 3 of our schools had full-time athletic directors, with one of them starting this year, one of the 3.
But maybe I'm not understanding, but the proposal is to now have 7 more full-time non-teaching athletic directors by removing them from the teaching duties.
It is to allow those athletic directors to be full-time athletic directors being paid for with this reallocation. And then the school takes the allocation that they had partially used for academics and have a full-time teacher. So to your point, there would be an additional person at those schools.
I think what I'm asking is,
you're correct. So it's right. The answer is twofold. The athletic directors aren't being added, but there will ultimately be a teacher added with that.
But will there be a full-time athletic director employed in a non-teaching capacity at every high school in CCSD?
Yes, ma'am.
So there won't be a high school left out is what I'm looking to make sure.
Correct. This covers all of our high schools that have athletics.
And then to Joyce's point, I do have to caution, because it's always a little bit here and a little bit there. You're now creating a new bottom baseline for next year's budget. And
yes,
that's, you know, with the consistent tax increases heading into where we're heading into. And I know that we did some stuff in the last committee of the whole meeting, and Joyce was pretty good about making sure it was a recommendation, not us binding the next budget, but I'm starting to see some budget creep where you're creating a new bottom line that's already going to require a tax increase before we ever go into the budget season of looking at normal increases in expenses. And I would just caution that I understand the need for the full-time athletic directors. I understand all of that, but we didn't do that in a vacuum. We did that after raising taxes last year. We did that after dipping into fund balance for this or that or the other. And I would just caution us fiscally to kind of take a look at that more holistically as we bring these little pieces every so often.
And I agree to that point, Ms. Coates, and to the CFO, Shauna's, just to acknowledge that when we started this process, actually months ago, there was the request was much higher. So she has been working diligently to make sure that she adheres to the fiscal responsibility, so that we don't get into this ongoing budget creep.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Kennedy. I was gonna mention that as well. I diligently watch the fund balance and our expenses, and compounding costs year over year. And then we have very robust conversations around it and how we mitigate risk in the future around it.
I apologize, but I'm going to recuse myself from this item if that's okay. I just, I've got 2 kids who are heavily involved in sports, and I feel like it might be inappropriate for me to be voting on this matter.
Well, I would, I mean, certainly I'm not going to challenge anyone's position to recuse themselves, but to Jeff's point, when you take a look at the athletic programs in our surrounding school districts, I'm not sure the word, I think the word I heard maybe was robust. I mean, if you take a look at across the state of South Carolina, it's just, I mean, the idea that we don't have more support for our young people to get into athletics is something you don't see across the state. Even in my small hometown of Winsboro, Fairfield County, with 3,000 kids in the school system there, I mean, their athletic programs are fully supported, you know.
And I do appreciate that, and I do agree. I mean, I come from the upstate where it's absolutely unheard of not to have these things. You are correct. It's just that we didn't do this in a vacuum. We did this by adding other things around, and I'm just cautioning to take a more holistic view. But I am going to make a motion to approve this. I think it is a worthy idea. And Joyce, if that's okay, I'll make that motion. Either she's not, there she is. Either she's not.
I think we lost her. She may be frozen.
She's having, okay, so she is having some technical difficulties. I believe this is the last item we have, so I'm going to make a motion to approve. Is there a second?
A second.
And so with Mr. Griffin abstaining and Joyce is not able to vote, what's everyone else? Do we have a quorum to vote?
I'm back on Cindy.
All right, thank you. So
Yeah, thank
we've got
you.
a motion and a second on the floor, Joyce.
Okay, thank you. We have, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposes? Okay, item carries. Thank you, Cindy. I don't know what's going on, but I kept going out and in. Assuming, Sean, anything else? Jeff, anything else? Mr. Kennedy, anything else y'all need to say to us?
I don't have anything else regarding the agenda, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good.
Well, with that being said, the meeting stands adjourned. Again, thank y'all for your attention to this meeting today.
Thank y'all. Bye.